like to welcome everybody to our final nature lecture series sponsored by the Wittenberry Land Trust in the town of Bloomfield. It is going to be concerning bats of Connecticut. We're happy to have Richard Taylor back, who's a master wildlife conservationist with the DEEP program. And I'm here hosting with Sharon Mann from the Wittenberry Land Trust. I work for the town of Bloomfield Leisure Services Department. I'll turn it over to Sharon, and
well, thank you.
We'll get started.
Okay. Well, Richard's been here before. He's a retired human resources executive, and he has an interest in wildlife and fishing all his entire life. That's pretty good, Richard. And now, since his retirement, he's has completed the Connecticut's Master Wildlife Conservationalist Program, which Matt mentioned. And so I'm going to say, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Richard and welcome him to our program.
Well, thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Matt, for hosting me again. This is a wonderful series that you conduct, and I'm going to get off of the videos so you can, so I don't take away any space on your screen, and then we'll get started. This is the programs that I'm offering today that I've offered previously. There are 9 total programs by the Master Wildlife Conservationist team, and we're adding more all the time, but I'm very excited to present bats of Connecticut. And most of the pictures have been taken by Paul Fusco, who's with the Wildlife Division, Connecticut Deep. And there are also other pictures where we've given credit. Other members of the Deep Wildlife team that are part of the bat program have also have credits on this presentation. But I wanted to make sure that I gave credit to the people who do a lot of the hard work and capture these pictures. And also to Kate Moran, who is a deep wildlife biologist who assembled this presentation for you today. But I want to take a look. A lot of us don't get a close-up view of bats. So it's really, I think it's kind of interesting to know which bat is which. So the bat on the very left side is a hoary bat. They're a very large bat. The bat in the middle is a tricolored bat. And then over to your right is a northern long-eared bat. So we're going to go through different types of bats and where they're found and kind of bats of the world and bats of Connecticut. So I just want to get to my next. So this is where, if you look at the bright colors, that's the high bat richness, as they call it, the concentration of bats. Now, if they're found on every continent of the world except for Antarctica, and the bats are a member of the order Chiroptera, which is the second largest mammalia order. And believe it or not, there are over 1,300 bats in the world, bat species. And that represents 20% of all the mammals on Earth. If you look at this slide, you'll see that the areas of high bat diversity are concentrated around the equator. But since bats can fly, they can migrate. So you can see that they have made their way into other continents of the world, and that those areas are low concentration. Again, we don't have the high numbers like the 1,300 types of bats, but you see the blue shaded around the state of Connecticut. But all the bats came from the tropics originally, and they've just made their way throughout the world. So why should we care about bats? And bats are very, very important, and I'm going to explain to you how important they are to a lot of things, but they're actually a very cool creature. And this is an eastern bat, red bat, you see here on the tree. And they're important to a healthy ecosystem because they provide a balance to things. They're also extremely helpful to agriculture and forestry. And also we should care about them because they're in trouble. And I'm going to get into that a little bit farther into our presentation because their numbers are declining rapidly. These are the species of bats that are found in the state of Connecticut. There are 9. And I'll just leave this slide here for a while because there's quite a few different colored bats or different types of bats you see. But I'll spend a few seconds here so you can look through these. And the bat you see pictured here, excuse me, is the silver-haired bat, a very tiny bat. And that's, again, it's up against a tree. But we're going to get into the types of bats these are, and then I'll talk a little bit about each of those groups. Now, all of the bats in Connecticut are insectivores, which means they use echolocation to capture their insect prey. Now, the next thing I want to share, which is kind of the scary part, is this is the conservation status according to the Endangered Species Act of our bats in Connecticut. And you can see from the top, the big brown bat is not listed in Connecticut or is not listed federally, but below that, you'll see in Connecticut, the silver-haired bat, red bat, hoary bat are listed of special concern, and that's not a good thing. It means their numbers are declining. And the 5 bats at the bottom, the eastern small-footed bat, the little brown bat, northern long-eared bat, Indiana bat, and tricolor bat are all listed as endangered in Connecticut. And that was not always the case. So we're going to tell you about why that's happened. So if you're curious about the concentration or the makeup of the bats that are in Connecticut, this is a listing of the concentration. 78% of the bats you see out there are made up of the big brown bat. 18% are the eastern red bat, and then the silver-haired, little brown, hoary, and the tricolored bats make up the small 4-piece of that pie that's left. Now, if you're wondering how do we determine the numbers of bats from the different species, this is based upon the bullet on the bottom. It's a statewide acoustic survey conducted by the Deep Wildlife Team, and that was from 2011 to 2015, and that's what they're showing the concentration of these bats that are in our state. Now, the other thing about that is during that period, 2011 to 15, that is a kind of post white nose syndrome. The effects of the white nose syndrome have taken place, and that's why we're seeing a decline in the bat population in the state. So farther into the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about acoustic technology and acoustic monitoring, and that's how the biologists, wildlife biologists that manage the bat program gather up all these statistics. Now, there are 2 types of bats in Connecticut, or 2 types, I'm saying, not two. There's the cave bats that you see here. These are kind of close-up photos, kind of like mugshot pictures of the bats. But there's the cave bats that you see here, there's six of them. They spend their winter months hibernating in caves and in mines. And in the summer, they form into maternal colonies in tree cavities, old barns, maybe up in your attic or in a specially designed bat house. And as you can see from this slide, 5 out of 6 of these bats in Connecticut are listed as endangered under the Connecticut Endangered Species Act, and 2 are federally listed. Now, I also want to spend just a few seconds talking about what this means when something is endangered or threatened or a species of special concern. The endangered species designation, what that means is a native species that's in danger of extirpation within the state of Connecticut, and any species listed as endangered under the federal Endangered Species Act. Of course, extirpation means they will no longer be found in the state. Now, the threatened species, that designation means it's a native species, likely to become an endangered species, and any species listed as threatened under the federal Endangered Species Act. And then the third designation, the species of special concern, again, a native species having a restricted range or habitat in the state, is a low population or such. And the other part of this definition doesn't really apply to bats, but I'll continue to read it. Or the low population, or to be in such high demand by man, it is unregulated, taking would be detrimental to the conservation of its population, or has been extirpated from the state. But that's a definition that's used for all wildlife. So it could be hunting people, an animal that's overhunted, or a fish that's overfished that might fall into this category. Now we have 3 migratory tree bats in the state of Connecticut. And as I mentioned before, the eastern red bat is the second most populated bat in the state. Then we have the hoary bat and the silver-haired bat. And this is a kind of close-up picture of what these bats look like. Now, these bats will spend their time in trees in Connecticut, but then because they're migratory, as it starts to get colder, they start to make their way south into warmer climates to overwinter. There's increased evidence, however, that the eastern red bat is actually spending more time in Connecticut and perhaps not migrating and overwintering into the southern climates like they have traditionally. That could be because the weather's getting warmer and they're finding a place to hibernate, but they're not making the trek south. But so that's kind of an indication of some things are changing. Now, as I mentioned before, bats are part of the order of Chiroptera, and they have a skeletal structure more similar to human beings than to birds. And as you can see from this diagram, Chiroptera literally means hand wing, and the bats are the only mammals that are capable of self-powering flight. And if you look at this diagram or this picture of this bat, you can see that the skin is stretched between the elongated finger bones to form wings, and then the tail membranes, that skin connects to the tail and the hind legs, and that aids in their flight and also capturing insects. Now, if you look closely at this diagram, you'll see, or this picture, you'll see where they identify the tail and the cowgar. As the bat is flying through the air, capturing insects, if it misses the insect, the cowgar and the tail membrane will actually serve as almost a catcher's mitt, will catch the bug that the bat misses, and then the bat will pull the bug out of the cowgar and tail membrane area. So they're very well equipped to hunt insects, and so God has just made a wonderful creature here. But you can see they have upper arm, second finger, third finger, fingers just elbow, knees, just like a human being has. Now, the other thing that the wingspan of the bats in Connecticut range anywhere from 8 to 16 inches, and the hoary bat is one of the larger ones, but their body weights are quite tiny, anywhere from 3 to 30 grams. And you've probably heard of a flying squirrel before. A lot of people are wondering, well, if it's the only mammal that can fly, doesn't the flying squirrel fly? Well, the flying squirrel doesn't really fly. It actually has some excessive skin between its arms and legs, and what it does is it glides, and then it glides from tree to tree as it's making its way around the forest. So the bat is truly the only flying mammal. So the other thing I want to be clear about was what bats are not. And people will say, "Oh, that person is blind as a bat." That's really not true. Bats have very normal daylight vision, and they also use their echolocation, and I'll get into that in a second, to navigate in total darkness. And they also have very good hearing. A lot of people aren't aware of that. So the other thing that they have is they're not mice or flying mice, even though the German word for a bat is actually Fledermaus, which means flying mouse. They're also not rodents. And as I mentioned before, they're members of the taxonomic order called Chiroptera. And the other thing you've probably heard over the years is bats. If you walk around at night where there are bats, they might get tangled in your hair. Again, bats can see very well. They're very agile flyers, and they have no trouble avoiding obstacles, including your head. If you've ever walked at night where there are bats around, sometimes you may see a bat coming toward you in the distance, but they quickly veer off because they know exactly where you are, just using their sight as well as the echolocation. And the other thing that people have heard that bats are a lot of rabid bats, well, that's not true. It's actually somewhere between 0.5% and less than 1%. Well, it's less than 1%, but it's probably closer to 0.5% are rabid. And rabies is a viral disease that affects mammals, including skunks, raccoons, dogs, cats, bats, etc. But they have a very low incidence of rabies. But with all wildlife, you should take precautions and not assume that the bat that you shouldn't not handle a bat. You just don't want to take a chance, even though it's less than 1%. If the bat is acting a little odd, you don't want to take a chance and take a chance that you could get bit. Now, the pictures of the bats in this particular slide were taken by Kate Moran. Again, she's a deep biologist. And the big brown bat that's kind of huddled in the bottom is that was taken at the old Newgate prison in Connecticut. Now, this is how echolocation works. This is pretty fascinating. The ultrasonic sound bounces off the surrounding environment. And here you see a slide of a bat, or picture of a bat, with the yellow sending out an echolocation ultrasonic, and it actually bounces off an insect, and then that bounces back, very similar to submarines. And the other thing that's really interesting about bats is they have a specialized ear muscle that closes when the signal is emitted and then opens to return to pick up the sound. Now, from that little exercise the bat goes through, they can get a mental image of exactly what the surrounding is, and also if there's any insects in front of them. So they're very effective. It's a very effective adaptation for catching insects on the fly and to navigate in total darkness. Now, just to give you an idea of how beneficial bats are, a bat can eat up to 1,200 mosquito-sized insects per hour, or 6,000 to 8,000 insects in the course of a night. So that's why having lots of bats around is a very good thing. They keep the insect, especially mosquito populations, in check. So they're very important. And as those numbers are declining, and some of them are down as much as 95%, that means we have more insects, especially bad insects, and also especially mosquitoes. Now, if you're ever wondering, what about the young bats? Do they have this built-in where they're immediately, as soon as they can fly, they can use echolocation effectively? Well, it's interesting. Young bats will fine-tune their echolocation because they have to practice using it like a lot of young creatures. But they also listen to the calls of their more experienced hunting companions, and they kind of figure out, because they're very quick learners, what the adult bat is doing and how they're using echolocation and bat sonar to locate prey. So they pick up basically by listening and watching their older counterparts. And they also have very distinct and complex calls. Some of the bat calls are almost like phrases. And people have said that the University of Texas and Austin study said that it's stunningly close to what we would call a language. So they're quite fascinating. Now, I mentioned before they can eat their entire body weight. I mentioned this to Sharon earlier. Bats can eat their entire body weight in insects in a typical summer night. That's a lot of insects. So in other parts of the world, so the bats are fruit eaters, and some are nectar feeders. But look at the number here. This is $3.7 billion of value to U.S. agriculture and forestry. As these numbers drop, that value obviously is dropping because we don't have as many bats. And they're also very prolific insectivore eaters. They keep the insect population in check. If there's lots of bats around and they're reducing the insects, they're very good for the farmers' fields because the farmers don't have to use as much pesticide because they don't have as many problems with insects. Now, the nectar feeders will actually pollinate a guava, which is used to make tequila, and the fruit-eating bats are important for seed dispersal and tropical forest regeneration. Some of those bats, that make up that 1,300 bats that are found around the world are quite large in size. They're not as tiny as a lot of the bats we have here. Now, the other interesting thing is over 300 species of fruit in the world depend on pollination from bats, and another 200 species of crops depend on bats for pest control. So bats are very, very important to our environment. Now, the other thing, and this is a slide I got from Bat Conservation International, and this is kind of just a little more detail of what I just explained. Bats they provide protection for those fruits and vegetables on the left, and also cotton. You can see peppers, corn, tomatoes, coffee. They propagate the seeds by helping to spread the cocoa, the fig, and the black pepper seeds throughout their environment. And also they're active in pollination with the guava and also wild bananas. So if we don't have bats, then you can look at all the things on this slide. And these things, a lot of this won't happen because they are very, very effective in protecting, propagating, and pollinating vegetables and fruits. Now, when you eat your body weight in bugs and insects, then you're going to have to go to the bathroom. So that's what bat scat is called, guano. And it's really important because it forms a nutrient foundation in the cave or in a mine where the bats live. And that supports all types of life forms in those caves. It's also, if you're a gardener, you probably know all about guano. Organic bat guano is a very good fertilizer because it's very high in nitrogen. Now, you don't want to use bat guano just straight up as a fertilizer. It's best to be mixed in with other composting material because of the high nitrogen content. It actually makes the fertilizer that you have much more effective because it's just not. You have to kind of mix it up. You can't just put it on straight. Now, if you're in your attic and you see these little black dots on the ground, if you want to figure out what they are, look closely at them. And if they're black and shiny, then they're probably bat guano. That black and shiny is the broken up insects that they digest, and then as they poop it out from whatever they're in your attic, it lands on the deck of the floor. Now you can see a little is on the picture in the center, and then the person on the right, that's a bat colony that's probably been in that attic for a real long time because that's a real large pile of guano. So if you are a gardener and you're not using guano, I'd suggest it. It's very good. Now let's talk a little about the seasons of a bat's life. The bats enter hibernation in October, and that allows them to survive in the winter. Now, a bat has a heartbeat of about 700 beats a minute, and then when they get into their hibernation stage, it drops to about 20 beats a minute. And that allows them to survive because if there's no bugs around, then the bats can't survive. So Mother Nature allows them to go into hibernation stage, and that allows them to survive to make it through the winter. So they emerge in mid-April. They raise their pups in June and July, and then their migration to hibernation sites begins again in September. And the seasonal timing of these movements also depend on the species of bat, and also can be influenced by weather. And the warmer the weather's becoming, sometimes it can throw these seasons of a bat's life off a little bit. So we're watching that closely. So bats also, this is just a word slide, but I'll just go through this quickly. Bats form into a colony to roost, and the males and females remain separate until mating. Now they mate in the fall, and the female stores the sperm or delays the fertilized egg from growing until the spring. That's called delayed implantation. Now, if you attended my Fisher talk, the Fisher also does the same thing, and so do walruses, and there are other animals in the animal world. And by delaying the implantation of the sperm to fertilize the egg, what that does is when the actual egg becomes fertilized, it's probably the best time where there's food abundance and where there's a good chance that the animal will survive. So the bats do the same thing as the walrus and the fisher. So the female bats will form into a maternal colony for warmth and protection. And then in the spring, when the food is available, that's when the bats will give birth to the young. They're called pups. Generally, one pup is born per female, but some have as many as 4 pups. And that's in June and July in Connecticut. And the pups will huddle against their mother's furry belly to keep warm, and the female will nurse the pup with her milk. Now, within a couple of months, the pups begin to fly, and they're about the size of their parents, and they're starting to learn echolocation and how to feed themselves, but they grow fairly quickly. Within a couple of months, they're out kind of fending for themselves. Now, the other interesting thing, if you wonder, and I try to anticipate questions I may get from people who attend my talks. So I was wondering if a bat, how many breasts or nipples does a bat have? So it's interesting that there are actually bats that have more than others. The Lazurius genus, which is the red bat and the hoary bat, have multiple nipples. They actually have 4 nipples, which means if they have 4 young, they can actually feed them. And typically, you don't see the bats with 2 nipples having 4 pups. If they do, it's probably going to be very difficult on that mother to feed the 4 young babies or the 4 young pups. So just a little bit of information that I was not aware of until I did a little bit of research on those 2, on that specific species. Now, bats, like a lot of creatures, have enemies. The threats to them, their natural enemies are snakes. Of course, snakes can crawl into areas into barns and up trees. Also, hawks. Hawks will wait for bats to come out of their wherever they're bedded down for the daytime, and also owls, because owls hunt at night, so they can see the bats pretty quickly. They also have unnatural enemies such as domestic cats, and the real danger here is also the feral cats. And we have millions and millions of songbirds that are killed every year by cats. So cats they go after anything that moves around, and cats are very good hunters, so they can also decimate a bat family. And also vandalisms, if there are areas where the bats are, this might be in a mine or a cave where the bats are spending the winter. People will break into the cave and do vandalism. That will hurt them. And you can imagine with a windmill farm, if a bat is migrating and the windmill blades are spinning, it can obviously kill the bats, and also kills other migratory birds that are making their way from either south to north or vice versa. And then the other thing that happens if people see bats in roosting sites and they don't want bats, we always recommend let the bats finish their kind of life cycle in terms of raising their young, and then secure your attic. Please don't kill the bats while they're trying to raise their young. And the same thing with barns or outbuildings. If you want to secure those from having bats in them, wait till the bats that are in there have raised the young, and then they move on. And then with a lot of wildlife, habitat loss is a serious problem. As we develop land and cut down trees and agriculture and deforestation, these are a lot of the areas that the bats spend their time in the trees. And then the white nose syndrome, which is a horrible disease. It's killed millions and millions of bats. I'll go into that in a little bit. And then global warming, we really don't know the impact of that yet, but the changes are being observed, and the researchers studying the impact of this. Because of the large temperature swings, sometimes a bat could actually come out into an area thinking it's springtime, and then all of a sudden there's snow the next day and the bat is killed. So that's not good. And then the other thing they've noticed is there has been some movement within the hibernaculum where they actually hibernate. It seems like the bats are selecting the cooler locations in the caves to reduce the growth of the fungal pathogen PD, and that's the white nose syndrome. In the picture here, you see taken by Paul Fusco. This is a silver-haired bat. Now, some of the things that are being done is the people who design windmills are looking into this. They're trying to figure out ways to change the design of windmills so it doesn't kill migratory birds or bats that are migrating. So people are identifying this, and they're trying to do what they can to protect the bats and the migratory birds that are flying back and forth. So this is why bats are in trouble. This is a picture of a little brown bat, and this white nose syndrome is a very unfortunate disease. It was a disease that affects hibernating bats. And what happens is that this was first discovered in Albany, New York around 2006, 2007, and it caused widespread mortality in the bat population, the bats that hibernate. And they believe the disease came from Europe or Asia, but what happened is you think, well, why isn't it killing the bats that live in that area? Well, like a lot of diseases or funguses, if it's not found naturally in that area, the animals have not had a chance to adapt to the disease and kind of build build protections against it. So it's believed that the white nose syndrome pathogen, it actually there's kind of an equilibrium that has been established with the bats in those regions, but because it was brought here so quickly and it's not a natural occurring fungus, it's killing the bats here because they just haven't not had a chance to adapt to this change. I just want to give credit here. This photo was taken by Al Hicks. So that they have to be really careful, and that's why you're going to see that a lot of controls on letting people into areas where there are bats hibernating. Now, hopefully I can get this to work. This is about white nose syndrome. So that was produced by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and so that's a pretty powerful message. So white nose syndrome, and you can see here what happens on the right. As a biologist, that what actually happens is fungal disease affects the 11 species of cave or hibernating bats in North America. And what it does is it disrupts the normal hibernation. So as I mentioned before, the bats have a heartbeat of about 700 beats per minute, and they have a high metabolism. And then they drop that heartbeat when they're hibernating down to about 20. And they rely on the fat reserves in their body because they have such a low heartbeat to get them through until springtime. But what happens with this white nose syndrome is that it continues to wake up the bat, and it causes the bat heartbeat to be raised, and also to use those precious fat reserves that they allow, that keeps them living and healthy until springtime. So what happens is they have no more body fat, and they begin to starve before springtime, before the insects are out, and then they have to leave because they have to try to find something to eat. And then you can see on the right, which is the bats will fly out of the cave, and it's freezing outside. There are no bugs, so the bats die. So it's a very sad situation. What this disease has done. But again, it started in the northeast of the United States. And since this disease has been in the United States, we've lost, it's estimated, about 6 million bats, which is very significant, especially when you consider what bats do for our environment, all the good that they do. So this fungus you can see here from this picture, this is a long Latin name. They just refer to it as PD. But it's a cold-loving fungus that thrives in humid cave environments. And that's where bats go. So you can see the picture up on the top right, and you can see why they call this the white nose syndrome. The bats in the middle, most of the bats, except for the bat on the left, have kind of a white fuzzy mold around the nose of their face. Those bats have been impacted by the white nose syndrome. Well, how does it spread? It spreads from bat to bat. If one bat gets the fungus, it'll spread to the one that's hanging next to it or hibernating next to it. It also, if there's soil that is infected with this white nose syndrome, that can, if the bat crawls across that soil, it also can get onto the bat, and then the bat will have the condition. And also through human facilitated means, which means that if somebody brings this fungus on their boots when they're climbing around a cave to explore, they may unknowingly be bringing a fungus in, and that is believed to what has happened. Somebody from Asia or Europe was climbing around in a cave in Albany, in the Albany area of New York, and they believe that they brought that to the United States. So it's really important that you be really careful and mindful that if you're walking around in caves where bats are hibernating, you could be killing them just by bringing diseases and funguses in that will hurt the bat. So they really don't have any kind of immunity to this because this is a disease that basically got dumped on them so fast that they haven't had a chance to adapt, or their body hasn't, they've had no exposure to this in the past. And so they've not really built up any immunity. And the picture you see here, this is a little brown bat that you see in hibernation stage up on the top right. So what does it mean for Connecticut? Well, it was first documented in Connecticut in 2008. And again, it came into, they believe, the Albany area around 2006 to 7. So it didn't take long because bats fly, for that to end up in Connecticut. And they noticed right away through all the studies that they're doing in the monitoring, we had a steep decline in bats in Connecticut at multiple hibernation sites where the biologists know that the bats winter over. And then some species dropped by 95% or more, which is really a devastating story. And formerly common species that were found in Connecticut are now rare, and they could even face extinction in the state. And also the low productivity potential means this could take decades. It's not like a coyote where they could have 6 or 7 pups if one of the adults is killed. They only typically have 1 pup, and it takes a real long time for them to recharge a population that has dropped by over 6 million bats. So it's a pretty significant impact to the bat population. Now I'm going to activate this slide. On this slide, you'll see the red versus Appalachian Mountains on the right. That's around the area of Albany where the first white nose syndrome was spotted. I'm going to click on this, and you're going to see how quickly this has spread from 2006 to the present. And you're going to see some colors starting to form on this chart. So it didn't take long from 2006 to 7 to get to have this white nose syndrome spread across the country. And it's even up in the Seattle area, which is pretty amazing. And I don't know whether a bat was on some sort of equipment or a truck or something, but it ended up spreading the disease all the way to the West Coast. So again, it's done some pretty severe damage to the population of the hibernating bats in this country. So this is a U.S. Endangered Species Act sheet, and this is on the northern long-eared bat. And you can see that on the slide, the area where it says counties that have infected hibernaculum, where the bats are actually hibernating, and then where they have white nose syndrome with the bat. And it's spread very rapidly, and it's now into the Midwest of the country. It's working its way to the Rockies. This stuff really spreads like wildfire, and it's caused the status of this bat to basically be threatened because the numbers are down so much. So it's a very, very sad situation. Excuse me. So what are we doing about it? This is the white nose syndrome research. It's being coordinated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They're developing the national response to this, and all of the state wildlife agencies are also working with this, as well as farmers and other people who have a lot to be gained by having a healthy bat population. So there's a lot of research that's being funded to address each element of the disease triangle. That's the host, the bat, and then the pathogen, and then the environment that they work on. And our team here is working very closely on the habitat and the environment, as well as also working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to try to combat this disease or this fungus. And the national efforts include a treatment of field testing, and then DEEP will be involved in that if we get this treatment. But it's in the work for researchers. That could take years to develop this. And although we have some promising leads, some practical solutions are far from implementation. And you can imagine trying to get into the caves to pick up each bat and put some sort of say if you had a treatment that you were going to put on the bat, you'd have to touch each bat, then you would wake the bat up and it would disturb their sleep pattern. You could end up actually killing the bat while you're trying to help it. And also, you can't necessarily just go into a cave and spray things, because you could kill other wildlife or other creatures that are in the cave. So this has been a real challenge, and the state, everybody's working on this because this is a serious problem, and we're doing everything we can to try to get this under control. So this is the update from the BCI, the Bat Conservation International. And you can read this slide, but it just say one, and you can see that some of this is pretty technical, but they're looking at biological agents as well as antifungal agents. And also they're doing it, some of the populations that have had white nose syndrome seem to have been stabilized. So they don't know if they're actually developing some immunity, the ones who have actually managed to get white nose syndrome and then survive. But there's just a lot of study to do. And again, bats are not the easiest creatures to sneak up on and get. You have to wait till they're hibernating to actually to touch the bat and to try to help it. So they're working very hard to do this, but a lot of the solutions they're working on will have to be tested, and our deep wildlife team will be involved in the testing when it comes to the state of Connecticut. So bat conservation in Connecticut, what are we doing in Connecticut to help conserve the bats we have and protect them? Our group in the state of Connecticut is keeping tabs on the population by monitoring the bat population. They go to the maternity colony counts. They do that. They also go to where the bats, the hibernaculum surveys. They go to the areas where the bats are hibernating to do counts there. And they also have special software that they use for acoustic surveys, and they can tell from the software exactly what the bat, which bat that is. So that's a very active program. They also focus on habitat protection, and they looked at some of the areas such as the caves and the mines. And people love to climb in caves and mines, but what they've done is they've started to protect those areas. They started to put a gate over they started putting gating in the hibernaculum sites in 2007. So the bats can get in without any trouble, but the gates will keep people out of the cave or the mine so that they're not tracking any more white nose syndrome into the cave. So the other thing they've done is they've done two forms of monitoring. Again, I mentioned the maternal colonies. Not only is that a maternal colony of existing females that have perhaps been together before, but then as a young female, she is looking for a colony to join, they're also monitoring that. And then the mobile acoustic surveys, that's a passive monitoring, and they set that up at sites throughout the state to determine what bat population is there and what specific bat it lives in that particular area. They also provide technical assistance to the public and also to land trusts and municipalities to try to help them so people understand that bats are at risk and what those people can do to help. So this is the acoustic surveys that's done. This was started in 2011, and there are 12 routes that are set up in Connecticut, and they go from May to October. And this is pretty amazing, but they drive 20 miles each of these 12 routes, and they drive about 20 miles per hour, and they do it twice a month. And they have specific software loaded into their computer, and they can pick up the details of what bats they are monitoring through this acoustic survey. And one of the things that I've been informed is that the volunteers for this are key, and they really rely on a lot of help from volunteers. So if you want to get involved in helping bats and working with the DEEP team on this, there's an address here, deep.batprogram@ct.gov. Get in touch with those biologists, and they'd love to have you help them. The other thing they do is they listen to the bats foraging for insects at night, and again with this software, it allows them to determine what type of bat is foraging based upon the signal that they send out when they when they're doing the echolocation. So they can identify the species, and they have specialized call software. And then each year the bat or the deep wildlife team that specializes in bat will analyze those results. And that's how they determine the population of bats we have in the state, and the types of bats and what the kind of distribution is. And the deep team is also involved in the American Monitoring Program. And this is a fascinating site. I went to the website here. And if you go to this website, you can see all the monitoring of the bat populations in each specific bat, almost by state. It's got incredible amounts of details, but our deep team in Connecticut is also supporting the American effort to monitor the bat population. So there's a lot going on with acoustic technology to help that, and that is managed by the U.S. Geological Survey team on the national level. So I talked briefly about rabies before, and again, only 0.5% to 1% of bats get rabies, and they don't carry rabies. People think bats are all rabid. They're not. It's a virus that they would have to be picked up through a bite or deep scratch, or rarely through contact with mucous membrane. So there's two types of rabies: the passive and the ferocious. And the ferocious is where the animal will attack other animals. And the ferocious type of rabies is rarely present in bats. So if a bat has rabies, it's going to start to act very sick and kind of ill, but it's not going to start to attack people like some other animals do. Like you hear about some animals that you normally would only see at nighttime or coming up during the daytime and acting very strangely to people. That type of rabies the bats don't get. Now, if you can approach a bat very easily, then there's definitely something wrong, because bats don't want to be around and they don't want to be looked at by people. So if that bat is very close to you and doesn't seem to want to fly away, or it seems acting kind of odd, don't touch it or handle it. It could be a rabid bat, and you should make sure that you alert the facilities or the authorities right away. Get a hold of the deep wildlife team. If it's a bat that's sick and probably not flying, just be really, really careful around the bat, because they again can be dangerous when they're sick. Now, the other thing is a public guide. If you go to the Bat Conservation or CDC in Fish and Wildlife Group, they put this bat and rabies public health guide together. I picked one of these up at DEEP, but this is published by these three groups or sponsors. If you want to know more about bats and rabies, you can get that from that publication. Now, the other thing that happens is where do bats, if they're not in trees or not in people's barns, or not in some other outbuilding, how do they get into a building? And so I took a home and I just drew where they typically come in. So this is up on the top is where bats are typically found. If you have anybody putting a new roof on or walking around top of somebody's roof, all of a sudden you'll see a bat fly away. On the top of a chimney cap, if there's broken cap or the mortar on the top, or the concrete on the top is broken up, and there's a little access for a place for the bat to hide, you may see a bat up on top of that. Also, if there's loose shingles, the bats will climb under the shingles and basically spend their daytime there. Any loose bricks, under downspouts, if you have any broken clapboard or siding, they will slide underneath that. And then where the masonry work meets the cornice or the house siding, that you'll often see bats just hanging right there, leaning against that's a good place for them to hide. Then under any eaves or soffit vents, they will hide into those soffit vents if they can get in there. That's where they will typically spend their time if they can. And how do they get into your house? Well, I talked to Sharon before this. She mentioned that a bat had flown down into her chimney. If you have an open chimney at the top, it's very easy for them to fly down in that. You want to make sure that you don't have the flue open at the bottom, especially during this time of year. The bat could actually fly and get right down through the chimney and into your house. Then if you have vents like an attic vent, a dryer vent, etc., and any of those are opened or damaged, and sometimes you get woodpeckers and things to break those vent areas open, it's not uncommon for the bat to make its way through those areas. And if it's under or through any open doors, somebody leaves a door open or a window open with no screens, either a basement or garage or any kind of household, and it's early morning or late afternoon or at night, it's not uncommon for the bat to get into your house that way. Also, any screens, you should repair the screens because they can easily fly into your house. And also any gable vents, holes in soffits. Sometimes you'll get if there's those borer not the borer beetles, but that look like bumblebees, but they actually bore into wood. If they have drilled up into the soffit and then the woodpecker goes in there and starts trying to get those bees out of there, sometimes they'll open up enough of a space for the bat to climb into your soffit or up into the eaves of your house. So those are typically where the bats will hang it on a home, and that's how they get into your home. So this is a slide with lots of information, but I thought this would be information you should know. Bats typically live to be about 20 years old, and some of them as many as 40. And again, of the 1,300 species of bats in the world, only about 45 species of bats are in the US and Canada. Now this is another one, interesting one. The kitty hognose bat is only the size of it weighs as much as a penny. It's the smallest mammal in the world. And then the largest one, the flying fox or the pteropus, is a 6-foot wingspan. That's a huge bat. I've seen those before, pictures of them. Or videos of them, but I've actually never seen one. But I can't imagine a bat with a 6-foot wingspan. And the little brown bat, which we have in Connecticut, is the most common. It only weighs 1/4 to 1/3 of an ounce, and it has a wingspan of about 9 inches, anywhere from 8 to 10. The other thing, bats are very clean animals. They spend a lot of time grooming themselves. And by doing that grooming, that helps them to control and get rid of parasites. And this is what I showed you earlier. Without bats, say goodbye to bananas, avocados, mangoes, and many other fruits. They are critical to the growth of those, because they pollinate the bananas, avocados, etc. Another interesting fact: more than 3,000 plants rely on bats for pollination, seed dispersal, and pest control. And about 80 medicines come from plants that rely on bats for survival. So if the bats go away, a lot of our medicines that have been discovered because of these plants could be at risk. And research on bats has also led to a lot of advances in vaccines. Bats are it's a big study area. And then 23 billion or more in agriculture and human health savings for the planet every year. And that was from Bat Conservation International. So bats are very significant to our environment and play a key role. So what can you do to get involved? Every year there's a Bat Appreciation Day at the Old Newgate Prison in Connecticut. That's usually in September. Just go to the DEEP website when you get around that time of year, and they have the bat biologists there, the wildlife biologists that work with the program. They can tell you all about bats and show you all kinds of things that they're working on. You can volunteer to become part of the mobile acoustic survey team, as I mentioned before, and there's the address for that. Also, Sharon had asked me about bat houses, and I'm going to show you a slide in a second. Properly designed bat houses, and if you can put up a bat house, that would be fantastic, because it will support a maternal colony of bats in the summertime. And if you have outdoor lighting, try to not have the lights on all night, because that affects the bat population, and also wetlands where the bats forage. And if you have bats, please don't kill them. Report the maternal colonies to the wildlife division. And again, you can be a volunteer to also count the colony counts. And there's another, that's the same contact address, deep.batprogram@ct.gov. And if any of you on the call are educators, we have a bat education kit. You can contact Laura Rogers Castro at DEEP for that information. And if you see a dead bat, don't touch it. Contact the bat program at DEEP, and there's a number, and there's the address, there's the email address. But the best thing to do would be to call them right away. And if you do see a dead bat, don't pick it up, don't touch it. You want to have double gloves on. If you want to, the best thing you can do rather than throwing it out or throwing it in the trash, you put 2 sets of gloves on and put it in a bag and then contact DEEP right away. And they're probably going to want to study it to find out if it has any sort of disease or anything else. And they also recommend, if you're not going to be able to get in touch with DEEP for a while, to double bag it and then just to freeze it until DEEP you get in touch with DEEP. Now here's some other information. Here's an address for if you want to build a bat house. There's a bat fact sheet. This is provided by our DEEP wildlife team, and you can see the address right here. And also there are plans available for bat houses through Bat Conservation and Management, and there's the website for that. And also Bat Conservation International. These are all really good places to get bat house diagrams. And a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people will sell you a bat house that's not up to the specifications of what you're going to see on these 3 sites. And also they're very expensive. So make sure you get a bat house, and you when you put the bat house up, you follow the rules on what, not the rules, but the recommendations of where you should, it should be south facing, it should be dark colored material so the sun absorbs the heat on it. There's a lot of things that go into making a bat house, but you want to make sure if you're going to invest in a nice bat house, that you do have a house that's going to attract bats. And sometimes it'll take a few years before the bats actually will start to build a colony, a maternal colony in there. But the more people that have bat houses out, the more we're helping the bat population. Also, if you see a maternity roost of bats, contact the DEEP Bat program, let them know, and consider joining the acoustic monitoring team. And again, this is another sad one, that if you see bats flying in the winter, that probably means there's a hibernaculum, they're bats hibernating somewhere in that area, and the bat team will want to know right away where that is, where you are if you see bats flying in the winter, because they're going to want to come and check that out. And then if you have an old laptop you're not using because you got a new one, you can donate it to the Bat Patrol. And there again, it's the same address that the DEEP Bat program. And they'll use that to load the acoustics software on it, the monitoring software. And also tell a friend what you've learned here. Bats are very beneficial. They're important economically to the country, to the world. They're very, very critical to the earth, and as a matter of fact. And then here's some other, you might want to just take a picture of this, but this is a quick guide to bat reference material. This comes from DEEP. And this is, I just put it up here. A lot of people just take a picture of this with your cell phone, but it has a bat web page. It's information about the northern long-eared bat, the white nose syndrome, bat conservation management, the Bat Conservation International Group. And also there's a reference here to the North America Bat site. And this is an incredible site that has lots of details. They have information about every single bat that's in the United States and in North America. So that's another great site to go to. And we also are blessed to have Dr. Devon Frazier, who joined the DEEP wildlife team last year. And she's an expert on bat biology. And you can see her email address there. Contact Devon if you have any questions. And she also is the person who monitors the DEEP's email address. So you can either send her an email to her personal email or to the DEEP Bat program at ct.gov on any bat questions you may have, and she'll respond via email to your questions. And this is a picture of the Bat Appreciation Day. This was in 2018, and you can see there's lots of tables and displays that people it's kind of information sharing and what you can do to help. And these are the experts. If you really want to talk to the people, these are people that have their PhDs in this sort of science, and they're very knowledgeable, very helpful, and very willing to engage in conversation. So I would encourage you to go to this Bat Appreciation Day. And now we have to have a quiz, so we can, if you want to jump in on the you can send it in your chat. But these are, like with every class, we have to have a quiz. Okay. So we're going to ask you: are bats rodents, true or false?
False.
That's false, right? They're mammals. Bats are a member of the Chiroptera order of mammals. Chiroptera means
Flying mouse.
And wing.
it's hand wing. Remember, we said it's kind of like a humans. So that's hand wing. All bats hibernate in caves and mines.
False.
That's right. That's correct. False. A lot of them actually migrate and they go to warmer climates. Bats are cool and important for the economy, our ecosystem, science and medicine, all of the above.
All of the above.
That's right. And then bats are good for agriculture because they identify all that apply. And the answer to that is all of those they all apply. I also want to give credit to the Girl Scouts of Avon who developed this quiz, and I think having a quiz kind of is a good way to kind of end your talk. So the next part's the question. Bats make nests in trees and lay eggs in the spring. That's false. Connecticut is home to 3 different bat species. So that's false. And so that's false. We have 3 different tree bat species, but we have a total of 9 bat species in Connecticut. And then white nose syndrome is a disease that is killing bats by the hundreds, thousands, or millions.
Millions.
And that is by the millions. And then the white nose syndrome is spread primarily by wind and water.
False.
That's false, right? And we talked about it's either bat to bat, it's soil to bat, or it's through human intervention. And then there are some bats at risk of becoming extinct due to white nose syndrome.
True.
And that is true. We've lost, in some cases, up to 95% of the bat population in this country because of white nose syndrome. And now we'll open it up to any questions you may have.